What if a midnight warning from a superpower turned a young rebel leader into the spark of a global fire? And every choice from that hour on decided whether a nation would stand or fall. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe now to Faso Histories and be part of a community that uncovers Africa's most powerful untold stories. The night was heavy with silence when the phone rang in the guarded presidential residence, a sound so sharp it seemed to slice the air, and with it came a message that would alter the destiny of a nation. The voice on the other end was cold, clipped, and merciless, delivering an ultimatum that carried the weight of empires. Step down, abandon your reforms, restore the old deals that handed wealth to outsiders, or face consequences in 48 hours. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink as ministers glanced at one another, some pale with fear, others bristling with rage. While Captain Ibrahim Traoré stood unmoving, his eyes fixed on the table where a single lamp threw shadows across maps of a fragile country still finding its path to freedom. And in that moment, the young leader felt history pressing against him like a storm. Outside, the capital of Ouagadougou slept uneasily, unaware that before dawn the fate of their children, their minds, their markets might already be sealed. Yet whispers soon began to spread, first through guarded text messages among soldiers, then through journalists who heard of a warning, until by morning the entire city hummed with rumors, some swearing foreign powers were preparing warships, others insisting it was only bluff. But the truth was clear. The countdown had begun. In the council chamber, debates grew heated, one minister pleading for compromise to save lives and avert sanctions, another demanding defiance to preserve dignity. And all the while, Traoré listened in silence, his hands clasped tightly, his jaw set, as memories of Burkina Faso's long struggle for independence coursed through him like fire. He thought of the farmers who had finally reclaimed their land, of the children who now carried books instead of empty bowls, of the mothers who whispered his name with hope instead of despair. And he knew bending now would be surrender not just of policy but of soul. Yet he also knew the dangers. Sanctions could cripple the economy. Covert sabotage could plunge the nation into chaos, and a misstep might bring war. But as the clock ticked past midnight into the first gray light of dawn, Traoré rose from his seat, his voice steady as he declared to his council that Burkina Faso would not kneel, that the ultimatum was not a threat to a man, but to an entire people. And the only answer was resistance. Outside, as the sun broke over the desert horizon, the city stirred awake to a new reality, and with it came the haunting suspense of a question no one could yet answer. Had their leader just saved them from humiliation, or doomed them to a storm they could never survive? By the second day of the ultimatum, the tension in Ouagadougou was no longer hidden in whispers. It was alive in the streets, in the restless steps of shopkeepers who feared shortages, in the hushed prayers of mothers watching their children sleep, in the sharp eyes of soldiers patrolling markets where rumors traveled faster than bread. Then, just as the morning sun began to burn across the desert sky, the silence shattered. An explosion echoed near a border outpost, a deafening blast that ripped through the dry air and sent shockwaves of fear through the nation. Reports poured into the capital within minutes. A convoy had been hit, communication towers jammed, and strange aircraft spotted in the night, circling like vultures. Though no government admitted responsibility, the signature was clear. An invisible hand had made its move, striking not to conquer, but to warn, to remind Burkina Faso that defiance would not go unpunished. Inside the war room, maps littered with red pins glared back at Traoré and his generals. The faces of his commanders hardened yet uncertain, one urging restraint, another demanding retaliation, while the president stood in silence, his mind racing through possibilities. Was this just the beginning of sabotage or the spark of a wider war? Outside, protesters gathered, some chanting for strength, others begging for peace, and in their voices was the echo of a nation torn between fear and pride. The Western embassies released statements full of cold diplomatic language, warning of escalation without ever admitting who pulled the trigger, while China's foreign ministry sent a cryptic but powerful message: "You are not alone." The words spread across the city like wildfire, lighting both hope and suspicion. for some wondered if new friends would truly shield them, or if this was only another chess game of great powers. Traoré, however, felt the decision harden within him. A nation born from resistance could not surrender to shadows, and if war had been chosen for them, then they must shape its outcome. That evening, as the city gathered around radios and flickering TV screens, his speech rang through the air like thunder, calm, firm, and unyielding. He told his people that the attack was not a defeat, but a test, that Burkina Faso had been underestimated for too long, and that the struggle ahead was not for land or resources, but for dignity. Yet as his final words echoed through the night, a second blast thundered across the horizon, brighter and closer than before, shaking windows and hearts alike. And in that searing moment, the suspense became unbearable. The people knew this was no longer a game of warnings, but the opening of a clash that could consume them all. The night after the second explosion, the capital of Ouagadougou did not sleep. Sirens wailed in the distance. Soldiers stood on high alert at every checkpoint, and families huddled together in candle-lit rooms, whispering prayers as though silence itself could shield them from the unknown. But inside the presidential palace, another storm was brewing, one far more dangerous than bombs. Reports from intelligence officers revealed something terrifying. Someone inside the government had leaked military positions, allowing enemies to strike with precision, and suddenly the question was not just who attacked, but who among them had opened the door for it to happen. Suspicion crawled through the corridors like smoke. Generals eyeing ministers, ministers accusing aides, aides pointing to foreign infiltrators, yet no one dared to speak the one word that hovered above them all: traitor. Traoré listened in grim silence, his face unreadable, but deep inside he felt the weight of betrayal pressing harder than any foreign threat. For if shadows had reached into his inner circle, then every decision he made could already be in enemy hands. Outside the palace, the streets buzzed with rumors of spies and sabotage, with shopkeepers claiming to have seen strangers at night near power stations, and students accusing certain officials of living lavishly while the nation suffered. And though much of it was wild talk, the fear it planted was real and corrosive. Meanwhile, the Western media poured fuel on the fire, broadcasting stories that painted Burkina Faso's leadership as divided and weak, hinting that collapse was only a matter of time, while analysts on foreign news channels spoke with smug certainty that Traoré would soon fall, just as other African leaders before him. Yet in Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran, quiet voices rose, some offering secret aid, others waiting to see if the young president would bend or break. And in this tangled web of promises and traps, the line between friend and foe blurred into a dangerous fog. In one tense midnight meeting, a trusted general leaned close to Traoré and whispered words that chilled him. "Excellency, if we don't root out the traitor within, we will lose this war before it begins." And as those words sank into the heavy silence of the war room, the lights suddenly flickered, plunging the palace into darkness for a heartbeat before emergency power roared back to life. It was only a technical glitch, the engineers said later, but to everyone in that moment, it felt like confirmation. The enemy was not just outside the gates, but already inside the veins of the nation, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. Dawn broke over the Sahel like a warning, the rising sun painting the horizon in blood-red streaks as columns of dust rose from the outskirts of Ouagadougou, where armored trucks rolled into position and soldiers gripped their rifles with white-knuckled fists, knowing today would test not only their strength but their very faith in the nation itself. Reports had come at midnight that Western-backed militias were advancing through hidden desert routes, striking villages and cutting supply lines, and though the army mobilized quickly, something felt off. The attackers moved with uncanny precision, avoiding traps and striking exactly where defenses were weakest. And every soldier knew what that meant. Someone within had betrayed them again. As Traoré rode out in a convoy, his face steeled beneath the morning glare, he could see the fear in the eyes of his men. Not fear of death, but fear of fighting blind, of walking into ambushes guided by invisible hands. Yet when he stepped down into the dust and stood among them, the silence shifted, soldiers straightened. and hope flickered as if his presence alone could hold the line. The clash began with thunder. Explosions tearing through the ground, sandstorms whipped by rocket fire, and the cries of wounded men echoing across the desert. But as the chaos unfolded, it became clear this was no ordinary battle. Enemy drones circled overhead, dropping pinpoint strikes, and encrypted messages intercepted by intelligence revealed chilling instructions coming from voices speaking not the tongue of militias, but of Western advisors. It was a hybrid war, fought not only with bullets but with satellites and sabotage. And for a moment it seemed impossible to hold back the tide. Then, in the middle of the inferno, a twist erupted. An enemy vehicle captured by Burkina Faso forces carried crates of weapons not stamped with Western insignia, but with the seal of a neighboring African state, one thought to be an ally, and suddenly the battlefield trembled with the weight of treachery wider than anyone imagined. Inside the war room, ministers shouted at one another, accusing allies of betrayal, demanding retaliation, while foreign diplomats denied involvement with honeyed words. But Traoré said nothing, his silence louder than all their voices. Because deep in his mind a darker thought grew. If neighbors could be bought to betray, then who else had already sold their soul? As night fell and the dust settled on broken ground, the battle was called a victory, but it was hollow. For the cost was heavy, and the truth far heavier. The war was no longer just Burkina Faso versus the West. It was Africa itself, divided and bleeding, and in the shadows of celebration, the question burned hotter than ever. Who will stand with him when the storm finally breaks? Night cloaked the capital in uneasy silence, but beneath the stillness, the city throbbed with whispers, rumors of betrayal, foreign meddling, and unseen battles yet to come. And when the president appeared on the balcony of the palace under floodlights, the crowd gathered below felt the tension in the air as though lightning itself was about to strike. His voice carried not with the measured calm of a statesman, but with the fire of a soldier at war, declaring that the battle was no longer hidden in deserts or airports. It was now in the open, a struggle for survival against those who feared an Africa that could stand on its own. Yet as cheers erupted, a sudden flash ripped the night apart. An explosion thundered from the western side of the city, fireball rising into the sky as sirens wailed and people scattered in panic. And in that moment, the nation realized that the war had breached its walls. Emergency reports flooded in. The explosion had targeted a communications hub critical for the government's encrypted channels, cutting off lines to military outposts, and within minutes, disinformation spread across social media, claiming the president had been killed, sowing chaos in the streets. But Traoré, standing defiant under the smoke-filled sky, refused to retreat, ordering mobile units into neighborhoods to restore calm and vowing that not a single rumor would silence the truth. Then came the revelation more shocking than the blast itself. Intelligence confirmed that the strike was not the work of ragtag militias, but a coordinated operation led by a coalition of foreign mercenaries funded by Western capitals. And among the wreckage of the hub were fragments of devices carrying NATO-linked markings. Undeniable proof that the shadow war had crossed the threshold into direct confrontation. In the war room, aides begged the president to call for negotiations, to seek compromise before the nation was crushed. But he slammed his fist on the table and declared that Burkina Faso would not kneel. Not now, not ever. And his words echoed like gunfire across the chamber, silencing even his doubters. Outside, the people gathered again, waving torches in the night, chanting his name, their fear transformed into fury, and it was clear that the blast meant to break their spirit had instead set it ablaze. Yet in the dark corners of the capital, enemy agents regrouped, satellites watched from above, and whispers of an even greater strike loomed, leaving one haunting question hanging in the smoke-filled air. Had the true war just begun? If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe now to Faso Histories and be part of a community that uncovers Africa's most powerful untold stories.